So the trailer for the new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie came out, and we got to see our first look at all the major characters, including April O'Neil. And suffice to say, it's a pretty big redesign from how she typically looks. Naturally, as always, there is a ton of discussion online about this, and since it's very easy for conversations online to devolve into hostility pretty quickly, I wanted to take the time to hopefully clarify especially to people who are okay with the redesign, why so many people have an issue with it, and just why people don't really like redesigns of classic characters in general, because I don't think it's as simple as either side of this is making it out to be. Now, this is obviously very different from my normal content, and for anyone who's worried that this is going to get into social, political commentary, or I'm going to be going aggressive, don't worry, it's nothing like that. Rather, I like to approach this from a standpoint that has much less animosity and is more helpful to everyone involved. Whenever you have a substantial character design like this, you do tend to have the different camps of people who want it to remain the same and people who are fine with the change. And something you'll often hear from the people who are fine with it is, well, why does it matter? Why does it matter that it's a race change or a background change or profession change or anything like that? You know, as long as the property is good. I've never really been a fan of this argument though, because I feel it's predicated on the idea that a character's design or appearance is completely irrelevant to how people perceive, interact, or with or like them. And from the people who are more on the side of keeping things the same and not changing characters, and you'll sometimes hear them say like, oh, they made this character uglier or less attractive, or they're trying to make characters in general less attractive. I think that's closer to the reason, but I don't feel it's quite hitting the nail on the head. It's more than just literally how attractive a character is. To prove my point, I want you to think about your real-life friends and family, or people you're really close to. And I would then like to ask you, how many of them would you say are 10 out of 10? How many of them would you say are really, really, like, highly attractive? Not to you, I mean, like, it's more objectively. I can tell you for myself, it's not a lot. I do have some very good-looking friends, but generally speaking, most of my friends pretty average looking. And I put myself in that. In real life, I'm not an incredibly attractive person, especially when we get down into the gut area. But to follow that up, how often when you see those people, your friends, your family, people you're really attached to, despite how objectively attractive they are, or aren't, how often do you feel at ease just by seeing them? Or you feel better, you're in a good mood, you know, it makes your day just running into someone at the store or at church or wherever. Because if you're really close to someone and attached to someone, literally just seeing them, regardless of how they may objectively appear, just seeing their face can put you in a good mood, can lighten you. Because that's the way people are. People are visual creatures. We get attached to things visually. Whether you think that's good or bad is kind of irrelevant, that's just how it's done. It's not that their appearance is what attracts us, there are other traits. Typically you get attached or attracted to people because of their character or because you share interests in them, and you develop an attachment to their physical appearance because of their character, which is what you are actually attracted to. And of course, to clarify, attraction, I'm not just talking romantic, I mean just in a sense that you are drawing to this person, you want to be close to this person, you want to interact with them. Well, it's no different for fictional characters. I mean, that's the point. Fiction is a way of emulating real life. And when you get attached to a character, though it is not the appearance itself that you're attached to, the appearance is the visual representation of what you are attached to. If someone came up to me and looked like no one I'd ever seen before, but kept insisting they were my best friend, I would be very on edge, and I would probably want to back away from them very slowly. Because essentially what's happening is that you're being told to accept something that your brain is processing as objectively false. And it's the same way with fictional characters. A very strong recent example of this that I remember is the SpiderMan game on PlayStation 4 and 5. For those of you who don't remember, Insomniac's SpiderMan game was initially released on the PlayStation 4, but got a remaster and re-released on the PlayStation 5. And though the game was virtually identical, there was one big point of contention, and that was the new look of Peter Parker. And it's not that there's anything particularly wrong with the new design objectively, it could potentially be a Peter Parker design, but it doesn't matter if it could be, because it isn't. The character that people played as in Spider-Man, and the character people got attached to, was the PS4 one. That is the one they spent their whole time with, that's the person they grew to love. To now be given the same character with the same script and voice, but with a completely different face, is jarring. And whether you like it or not, it is stripping away something that people liked about the original product. And it's not a deliberate choice, it's not as if people are saying, oh, it's different, I'm choosing to not like it. It's just how our brains work. And when it feels like that redesign is done for absolutely no reason, all we can think of is why? Why are you taking away something that we liked for no reason? The main reason this bugs me is because with a lot of discourse online, it all devolves into insult slinging and animosity way too quickly, and I really don't think there's any need for that. Personally, I find it kind of unfair that whenever you have a new property like this that gets remade or redesigned, that people would place the onus on defending their position on the people saying that it should be faithful to the original, and not people saying it should be different. Isn't that backwards? Wouldn't we say the default is be faithful, and if you want to change something, okay, but you should have a reason for it. You should be able to justify it, and not just say, well, who cares if it's different? Thing is, people aren't as opposed to change if you wish, whether it be change of race, or change of design, or change of profession. April herself has undergone change, most notably in her professions, where sometimes she's a reporter, sometimes she's a scientist. I really don't think people are as opposed to potential changes as it's often made out online. What people are opposed to is feeling like they're being disrespected. I mean, that goes for both sides. Fundamentally, I can understand why someone would be a lot more aggressive towards seeming fans if they felt like no matter what they do, they're just going to be attacked and accused of being woke or racist or whatever. But a good mindset to have, in not just in this, but in life in general, is that even if you think you're in the right, sometimes it's worth just being the person to show respect to someone who doesn't deserve it. One of the classic cases of this that comes to mind for me is Henry Cavill as The Witcher. As some of you may or may not remember, when Henry Cavill was first cast as Geralt of Rivia in The Witcher TV show, and the first test screen footage of it came out, basically everyone made fun of it, because it looked kinda dumb. But by the time Henry Cavill had left The Witcher, attitudes had completely flipped the other way, and that's due to a number of things. One being, I think most people seem to agree that he was the best part of the show. He portrayed Geralt of Rivia incredibly well. And obviously that's fundamentally what a lot of this comes down to, is how good is the actual final product. But if you look at people who like Henry Cavill, which seems to be most people, what you'll see consistently is that they feel like he respects them as fans. There's a famous interview where a journalist brings up the topic of what he calls toxic fans to Henry Cavill, and this is what he said in return.
I'm curious if that's comparable to this sort of world, this culture of toxic fandom, where like if you make a movie, especially if you make a superhero movie, like you have great intentions, but there are always going to be a small yet vocal group of people there can kind of just be toxic.
I understand what you're saying, but when it comes to fans, it is a fan's right to have whatever opinion they want to have. And people are going to be upset because, especially when you're talking about books or games, because you're never going to be the exact person who they had in their head or who they played on Witcher 3, for example. I don't necessarily consider that toxic. I just consider that passionate.
When faced with this kind of backlash, it really doesn't take that much to simply say to your audience, I understand. So I guess to give this some sort of roundup point on top of helping people understand the perspective more, to creators, I would say generally try to avoid arbitrary changes. If you're going to change something, make sure you have at least some good reason for it, because otherwise it will rile people up. And that doesn't need to be a complex reason, but it's going to be ultimately up to you to decide what you think is justified. But you have to understand people are going to be resistant to it, and it's not their fault. That's what happens when you tell them this thing, which is clearly different than the thing I enjoyed before, is the same thing. And to that end, as a creator myself, my advice would be, even if you feel like you're in the right, and you very well may be, it is often worth it to just extend that olive branch and say, yeah, I get what you mean. And if you do that, I think you'll be really surprised by just how many people that attitude can win over. But anyway, hope you got something useful out of this. That's all.